Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 44 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Colin, does Kevin have an Oedipus complex?
I don't know. Well, maybe. Expand upon this thought.
His mother came to him in a moment of weakness. He could not give her what he wanted. He fled and caused her own
Let's
death.
not forget that Rufina is a bit of a mother figure. And there seems to be a little bit of a tension there with the chocolate, with the first encounter. I don't know. It's fishy.
And Sonate, what's going on there?
I mean, can you blame the man? Look at the woman.
I can't blame the man. Maybe I can blame us for combining two quite full chapters, seemingly, into one episode.
Well, we can blame you. So attentive listeners might remember from last episode when I pointed out that when I was not even done with chapter 5, Kevin had already finished chapter 6. And I thought that perhaps by calling him out on air, that he would recognize that we should not do that, so as to make sure that we are following our schedule for the podcast. Lo and behold...
My question is, if we had gone slow as you wanted, we wouldn't be in a position to live stream Storador 15.
Well, we will talk about that at the end. But all I'm saying is, lo and behold, I'm playing chapter 6, and Kevin's starting to freak out about, plot revelations that happen in chapter 7 because, oh my god, in chapter 7, plot actually happens. And we realized, okay, well, this is now fresh in Kevin's head. Let's just go ahead and play through chapter 7 so we can actually talk about it while it's fresh, because there's really good stuff there. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. Chapter 6, we got some gameplay stuff to talk about. There's not really that much story. There's some interesting moments to talk about, but it's mostly gameplay.
We have the standard opening flashback to Kevin's time in the church to open chapter 6. He's waiting for Rufina. He wants to go visit the orphanage they grew up in together again. Then Kevin gets word the orphanage is under attack by Jaegers. So he goes there to help stop it, because he is, at this point, is he a squire?
Yeah, he's a squire. He is not yet the Dominion. The Dominion, how he becomes a Dominion, we will talk about when we talk about chapter 7. But this flashback is basically a setup that will pay off in chapter 7.
And then, so there's that. Then we learn that the spirit helping us is the spirit of Celeste. How much it's Celeste, how much it's an echo or a vestige, same with all the other shades, that's open for debate and discussion. She's based on, maybe not the same person, but she's based on the one who left the records for us in the end of SC about why we should not reawaken the Aureole.
Right. Basically everything that Weissman wanted to do, she told us, don't let it happen again. So it's kind of nice to put a face to the name, I suppose. I guess we can talk about the different shades of people that pop up, because chapter 6, the way that it is set up is that it basically takes all of the characters that we have that have kind of unfinished business, in a sense. Or at least they try to act like they have unfinished business. Let's put it the way that is. This chapter is kind of like fan fiction. What if you got to fight Cassius? What if you got to go ahead and fight with Philip? Or all of these different kind of crazy people. It's a way for the game to make you fight people that you wouldn't normally be able to fight. Sometimes it's a cool factor. Sometimes it's, why do I have to fight these people? In my opinion.
Okay, so it's not enough coffee shop meet cute AUs to be fanfic, but moving on from that, the people that we fight, they seem to be fully aware they're not, real people.
Yeah.
They know they have a purpose, and they seem pretty okay with dissipating into nothingness or being absorbed into the larger whole when it's done.
They have hopes that that their real self will remember things, which they probably won't. What I find interesting is that they are well aware of the strictures around their behavior, right? They know that they have to fight. They definitely have free will. I mean, they have freedom of dialogue. They remember emotions that they have. They have memories of their past lives. which we know if you like bring certain characters in to talk to Cassius, for instance, right? He'll have different dialogue with each of them, and have different memories from the time when Cassius would have met them or would have heard of them. But at the same time, there is no resistance to these strictures. They do the will of Phantasma, even if they don't want to.
And that raises all sorts of questions that we don't really get answers to here or Chapter 7, I believe.
Well, what is your question? Because I think I have an answer, and I think the answer is from Chapter 7.
How much are these shades? What's the basis for their creation? Is it small c? Is it, big capital C creating something from nothing? It just seems odd. We don't really get much about what. Because we do fight some shades that we later have as party members. I think Annalise is one, Shara, and they don't really comment on their time as.
Well, I don't think that those are the same kind of shades. Those appeared to be images, in the same way that, there's these weird silvery-looking monsters that we fight sometimes that will transform into party members if you let them live long enough. So when we were fighting Shara or we were fighting Agate, once we finished those forms off, then the real silvery thingy popped up, and then you had to kill that to finish off the fight. That is not true for these. This is different in kind from the Agate fight.
Yeah, I get that. And I think there's only so much interrogation we can do based on the limited data. So.
Well, I think that there's a very easy answer to your question that is provided by the game, which is that these are creations from the people that knew them the most, from their perceptions of the people that knew them the most, or, in other cases, the aggregate knowledge of the group there, which is why Cassius Bright can be so full-fledged. The reason why I think we know this, looking ahead to Chapter 7, the character of Rufina is completely based off of Kevin's perception of who she is and how she should act. Reese is very explicit that that is not how Rufina would act, which proves that it's only coming from Kevin's perception, which kind of shows us how this is working. Same thing with Joshua and the Schwarzritter. That seems to be almost purely based off of Joshua's perception of the character.
Yeah, so it's not like their soul or some intrinsic interior part of them.
There has to be some kind of outside thing, because Cassius will make some revelations. For instance, apparently Cassius had heard about Rufina and wanted to recruit her as a bracer. And I don't think that anybody in the party would have known that. Maybe Zin. In that case, then there's nothing from the outside. But to me, that suggested that maybe Phantasma had knowledge to what was going on the outside as well. But it seems, by and large, to be created from the perceptions of the people inside Phantasma.
So what is Phantasma, then? It's the engine that allowed the Aureole to fulfill everyone's fantasies. Fantasy, Phantasma, which kind of raises the... Say you wanted someone to be with someone for varying degrees of wholesomeness. Let's just skirt that issue. It sounds like the Aureole would produce a facsimile.
Yeah.
A copy that seems to be missing something, which raises all sorts of uncomfortable questions about... Yeah.
Well, it also seems like the copies that would have been created would have been programmed to have to follow the rules of Phantasma, in the same way that the people that we meet in Chapter 6 have to fight the party, right? In a way that kind of sidesteps any uncomfortable questions, because they're not real. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. But
it makes the requesters even more skeezy.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's not hurting anybody except perhaps the requester, because it's not like you are forcing somebody else to fulfill your wish. What Phantasma does is create another reality in which that wish is fulfilled without impacting the other person.
So it's a quasi-sentient robot, then?
Yeah, I guess. And you can have I suppose, an ethical debate about whether it's okay to copy somebody else's likeness for the personal enjoyment of another being. But in terms of direct impact on another, it's localized only to the perception of the requester, right? Or in this case, the group of requesters, since it seems pretty clear that our party is real. Everything else is created by Phantasma, but the people in our party are the real people from the real world.
I mean, my main takeaway is Celeste was right. Everyone else was a bunch of freaks.
I'm glad that you finally came around to that after an entire game of thinking that who gave Celeste the power to get rid of the Aureole.
2 minutes thinking about the implications made me a Luddite.
So let's talk about how this chapter is structured, because that's really where a lot of the gameplay is coming in. We're dropped into the Urbe scenic route by the villa, and they're used in the main games. There were like monuments around that you could. Were chests by them, maybe a monster or two. This time, they're portals. They're portals to different locations. And in order to go through them, you're required to bring a certain party member. So, for example, Chloe unlocks the schoolhouse, Annalise unlocks the Ouroboros factory / hideout in Valeria Lake. Richard unlocks the military base, which I forget the name of. And Joshua unlocks a copy of the Crimson Ark called the Black Ark. And these are gameplay areas then centered around those locations and characters that are tied to the character that unlocks them. The advantages to this, I want to talk more about the schoolhouse in a second, because I think that one's really interesting, but the advantages to this is that it gives us a lot of locations to explore, a lot of cool character interactions, and it does force us to use characters that you normally would not use. The main disadvantage, as Kevin pointed out in the last episode, and as I keenly was aware upon playing this, was that a lot of these characters you probably did not use coming this far. For example, Chloe was level 108 when everybody else was level like 126. So grinding was the name of the game if you wanted the characters that you had to use to be useful, and you do, because a lot of the fights are difficult.
Yes. The early levels, a good fight can get you multiple levels, but it's just still annoying and not frustrating, but just you're aware of the time that you kind of waste. There's that. 2, I think in general, the conceit behind each of these 4 mini arcs within the chapter is good. I think they're too long. Well, maybe not the schoolhouse, but definitely Annalise, Richard, and I think Joshua. I think it's too long, especially Annalise. I think the chapter could have been a lot better if it was, say, half the length.
That, or if these locations were a bit more inventive. And the Monochrome Schoolhouse kind of proves that point. I found that to be really interesting, because what you have to figure out is that in order to basically clear each area, there are multicolored guards and there are gray guards, and you have to kill the gray guards. If you kill a multicolored guard, then all the gray guards of that area come back. You kind of just...
Excuse you.
Is that what?
The black, not gray.
My bad. I don't... Anyway, the Black Knights. But the multicolored knights bring back the Black Knights. And you kind of have to learn that through trial and error. But what this... It creates something that's different than just enter an area and get to the area that you have to get to, which has been the main gameplay loop throughout this entire game. There's some actual gameplay variety here, where you have to explore and find the specific target and avoid this guy and fight that guy. It's gameplay variation, which I found to be refreshing. The rest of these places do not innovate at all. Annalise's area is the Ouroboros factory, but literally mirrored, which does nothing to change anything for the player, except that there are terminal messages that give you hints as to where you can get a lot of Sepith, and you have to take a picture of that and then flip it on your phone in order to read the message. That's variation, I guess, but it's not particularly fun.
Even the dungeon we got analyst that was fire instead of water at the local bracer school, I mean, even that was a bit different. Here, it seems 90% at least similar to what we saw in SC. So, and it's not even how Spooky Grand Cell like Chapter 2 was different.
Right. And then the military base, that's just the military base. I think
Yeah,
it might be a bit more expanded or something like that, because I don't think that we really went into that place very much, but
no.
there's not a whole lot of variation there. And then the Black Ark is the Crimson Ark, but it's black.
So they had a really good inversion with the monochrome schoolhouse, and then decided we're not gonna continue on this theme. Sucks to suck.
Yeah, basically, which was a real shame. And also, let's talk about the areas in terms of their importance. So Chloe, I guess it's good for introducing this new gameplay variation, which was interesting, and it was kind of cool to be introduced to this concept of the shades by like seeing the ravens, which we had just seen through a door. So okay, that's kind of cool. We got to fight Philip. We've already kind of seen Philip be a badass. This was also a way to show us that, you know, these copies retain their memories but have to deal with the strictures of
Indeed.
Phantasma. With Richard, we get really cool payoff about Richard versus Cassius and how this is Richard dealing with some problems of his past and his conscience. We get to fight Cassius, which is really cool. And then, obviously, Joshua, that's really important for plot reasons. I don't understand why Annalise has an area.
No. Chloe has a very intense emotional connection to the schoolhouse, to the academy, with her thing with Lecter, meeting Estelle and Joshua. Richard, the military base, is a symbol of his greatest shame and how he hopes to redeem himself. Joshua, the Black Ark, that's self-explanatory. Annalise gets knocked out in the factory. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And I'm... It's like they keep trying to make Annalise happen, and it's not going to happen.
As a gameplay unit, she's adequate with the right preparation. If you defeat Richard in her Impale log on her door, you get the best sword of the game. Neither of us did that, so she's taking up a valuable priority spot.
Now, granted, we could have gone back and done that, right? So that it is our fault that that didn't happen. But the other thing that this chapter kind of forces you to do, at least in my opinion, is okay. So I was forced to use Annalise, and then I already had Richard in my party, and then the next area was Richard, and I'm like, okay, cool. I don't have to grind because Annalise is already up here. If I wanted to then bring like a different character that was actually good, I would still have to then bring that character up through all of the levels that they couldn't get having gone through Annalise's area. But that's more of a gripe about the gameplay mechanics themselves. In terms of like the Annalise area, to me the only cool thing is fighting Kilika, which maybe we kind of have to do because they set Kilika up in one of the doors that we had talked about to be this intelligence unit, right?
Yes.
It's shown that she has some powers that we hadn't really seen. Through this door, through this area, we do get to experience that, which is a plus. I'm just not sure why they necessarily had to tie that to Annalise.
And it comes after you go through all sorts of levels. You fight Grant, you fight Corno, you fight Kurt. So when you get to Kilika on the rooftop, I believe it is, you're like, is this... we done yet?
Right, exactly. Now, I could see a different situation in which... So Kilika has strong ties to Annalise, I guess, by being part of the guild, but she has stronger ties to Zin.
Yes.
Zin also has pretty strong ties to the Dreadwolf, one of the enforcers, who we do have to fight on the Black Ark. And Zin has strong ties to Cassius Bright by virtue of both of them being high-level ranking members of the guild. So they could have designed a whole area around maybe Richard and Zin, where we get to see Richard coming to grips with Cassius, but then also Zin is showing us Killica's power. We're seeing a confrontation between Zin and the Dreadwolf, which is, in my opinion, way more interesting than Annalise existing. And then we've condensed things down into one where there were two, and it's more powerful because we get more big moments rather than having to fight Grant, Karna, and Kurt, who I only remember those names because they keep popping up, but they're not important.
No. Name one distinguishing thing about them. I think it's Kurt was the one who had his memories wiped or whatever. And that's about it.
Yeah.
They are tertiary at best. And that's chapter 6 for the most part.
Well, we do have to talk about the ending, which is the Black Ark. There we fight Don and Kyle. We have a big fight against the Enforcers, Luciola. We fight against the Dreadwolf. I forget his name. And we fight against...
Walter?
Yeah, Walter. And then who's the third Enforcer that we also fight against? Blue Blanc. We fight against Blue Blanc. And then we fight the Schwarzritter, which is, lo and behold, Loewe. Which I'm pretty sure you had figured out by the time that you got there. But what was your reaction when it was revealed that this was in fact Loewe?
I was not surprised. I was kind of calling this a while back. So, +1 for Kevin.
Sure.
So I get the intent is Joshua to have more closure with Loewe, but I thought what they got in the end of SC was a good moment to end the relationship on. And I know they explicitly talk about how this is a continuation, how Joshua's not as emotional now the way he was back then, but I thought it kind of weakened what we got.
I agree, and maybe part of the reason is that we hadn't really had enough gameplay time to sit on it. We see Joshua essentially coming to grips with his humanity again by feeling this grief at Loewe's death and then being rescued by Cassius and yada yada. And we know that they go off on a journey. We don't see any of that journey. Instead, what we do is we start a new game where, boom, the guy who had just died is there in the prologue. We don't have any real time to register Loewe's death, and we also don't witness Joshua's character change. So by the time that Joshua comes here and has this new closure, we're not even aware that he needs this new closure, and they're telling us about a change in Joshua, but they didn't show the change in Joshua. So I think that this had good intentions, but I do think it was a bit clumsily done.
Yeah, it's have the confidence to believe in the ending that you wrote to the last game.
Especially, this doesn't change that ending. It's just, I don't know. People liked Loewe, I guess, so they wanted to do something else with him. Also, I feel like they're trying to be more clever than half. There's no reason to change the Crimson Ark into the Black Ark, except for the fact that Loewe's alter ego is called Schwarzritter, aka the Black Knight. That's the only reason why. I can't think of a more deeper significance of changing the name other than, oh look, now they have both of the same thing. It's not clever.
So there's one thing. When you fight Loewe, well, first, there's this thing about why these people are drawn, and it's, people to the Phantasma realm. The people who aided Kevin, people who were nearby when the Orville disappeared. Richard and Ren don't fit the criteria.
Yeah.
No, they were there when in the hunt. They were with Kevin when hunting Wiseman.
Well, neither do Joshua and Estelle. Yeah. Or at least they're not near the area.
Yeah, but I mean, why Richard?
Yes, that's true. That's true. I guess technically Ren was there too. Yeah, I don't know why Richard. I'm glad that Richard's there because I'm glad we get to use him. And we get to explore parts of his character we hadn't seen before. Same with Ren. I think it's very important that Ren is here. But yeah, no, in terms of what guided Phantasma's selection process.
And then Loewe talks about, he tells Kevin, can you finally have complete confidence in your theory? Kevin says, yep, every last shroud of doubt of my mind is gone. And it was Loewe talking about how he's the final guardian. He's there because of what Josh was thinking. And that really solidified to Kevin, I know who the Lord of Phantasma is.
I have two things I want to bring up about this. The first is, I find the writing of Loewe's character in this to be bizarre. Because up until the moment that he removes his mask, Schwarzritter is an asshole. He is a cryptic dick. Basically only there to taunt the party. And then as soon as that mask comes off, he actually acts as if he is Loewe. He has the more brotherly bond with Joshua. He expresses positive emotions. And
Yes.
I want to get your opinion on that. Is that like a reflection of Joshua's perception of the guy? Because the mask is there because Joshua can't accept it. That's stated as the reason by Loewe himself. At the same time, it also just kind of seems like a conceit to hide his identity, even though it's pretty obvious anyway, just by his character design.
Loewe says, that the Lord of Phantasma called me, but they weren't the one who decided I should wear this thing, the mask. That was likely all of you. This world changes as a result of one's thoughts and desires. So, I think the game does want to be like perception is reality, but I think it's unnecessary. They should have done it a different way because it just seemed like they wanted to keep the ending, the spoil, the secret safe as long as possible.
Yeah. And to that point, now that we know who the Lord of Phantasma is, obviously I've known it the entire game. So I've been trying to pay attention, like, is it really foreshadowed that well? And I don't think that it is. What do you think?
So, almost day one, my thought was it's a doppelganger of Kevin Graham.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. Maybe different terminology, some details changed with the chapters, but a mirror Kevin Graham. With the evil goatee from Star Trek.
Of course. Obviously.
Now answer me this. Riddle me this, Colin. Is the game trying to make the players believe that? Do you think? Or is that...
Is it trying to make it believe that it's Kevin?
It's a doppelganger of Kevin. Does the game want you to think that, or is that just my interpretation based on the evidence? Not the preferred.
Well, I think there's more evidence for it to being a doppelganger of Kevin rather than Rufina. Because the two things that we actually know about the Lord of Phantasma is, A, if you have the voice mod patched in, the Lord of Phantasma speaks with a male voice. And Kevin reveals that he knows who it is, and it's somebody who doesn't give a crap about other people.
And this comes right at the times we're exposed to how, one, self-loathing Kevin is, and two, yes, how cold he is in dealing with other people. The Joshua comments about, I'd let her get kidnapped.
Right. Right, how he uses other people. So all of the roads lead to us thinking that it is Kevin. Plus, all of the description that we have of Rufina is nothing like that at all.
No.
So, the only reason why you might suspect that it is Rufina is knowledge of how stories like this tend to go. And even then, I don't know if that's a guaranteed way of guessing it, but you might say, okay, there's this character that's been introduced, she seems to be dead, she's important, why are we spending so much time on her? She has to show up somehow in an important way in this game, and at a certain point, the only one who it could have been is the Lord of Phantasma, because you can guess that Schwarzritter is Loewe by means of his haircut.
Now, I'm not saying that the game designers and writers suggesting one interpretation and that having it be another is bad. It's bad. That it's bad writing. That it's cheap. Or what say you? I think what I'm getting at is having all the evidence be A, and then turning out to be someone else based on stuff that you really couldn't reasonably have deduced feels a bit cheap. Whereas looking back, I still don't think how you could really guess it was Rufina based on the clues the game provided. It's a bit out of left field.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It completely falls in the face of the testimony that Kevin himself gives us. Now, Kevin could be mistaken,
Yes.
Of course, but the game also keeps pushing at us the idea that Kevin has figured it out. Now, I do think it's interesting, as I had mentioned before, that the Rufina that Kevin creates does not appear to be the same as the real Rufina. But even taking that into account, I don't think that it works.
And this raises a larger debate about foreshadowing versus twists. How much can one, should be plotted beforehand in the text versus something, like I said, straight out of left field that changes the equilibrium that you really could not have predicted.
Yeah, so let's talk about that real quick before we jump into Chapter Seven's plot, because there's a lot there. But I do want to pick at this question, because we've talked about it before on air. And I always refer to Game of Thrones, the last couple of seasons, where it's all about just plot twist, plot twist, plot twist. Whereas the
Yes.
earlier seasons are really good at laying out a plan, and then you can follow it, and it all makes sense. What I remember the showrunners
Yes.
of Game of Thrones saying at the end is that they wanted to quote unquote subvert expectations. I started playing Trails right when that was happening, and something that was refreshing was that Trails never tried to subvert my expectations. Trails met my expectations, well, set my expectations, and then exceeded them. To me, that was like the best part about its storytelling. So with that in mind, A, do you think that Trails in the Sky the Third so far is keeping up to that promise? And B, what is an example, if you can think of one, what's a good example of a plot twist, of a good plot twist?
Okay, an expectation that I don't want subverted, a coherent ending. So subverting expectations for the sake is not
Yes,
always good. I think in
I
general,
agree. I
the
would like.
third and Kaseki, these three games I've played so far, have done a good job of meeting, and I don't want to say twisting because not a plot twist, but making interesting standard conventions, tropes, moments, and giving them life and humanity. Joshua having a secret assassin past is so cliched, but the way they do it makes me not care at all because it's so integral to him as a character. For this twist, if you want to call it, in the third, it's a bit annoying, but where we see them go with it in chapter 7 forgives it for me because it really delves into Kevin's character. I do think in a way that a
Yes.
simple mirror would not have been able to do so, so I forgive them that. And
Yeah, I agree with you.
yeah,
I like the fact that that the Lord of Phantasma is Rufina. They're doing really interesting stuff with it. I'm only criticizing how
yeah.
we get there.
So it feels a bit twisty, but they're forgiven through the execution, basically.
Sure. So let's talk about that execution. Chapter 7. I'll give a quick plot summary, then we can talk about it. Kevin and Reese, the final area of the Chapter 6 plane, turns out to be Kevin and Reese's orphanage. And before they walk into the chapel, Kevin reveals what had really happened to Rufina. So, if you remember from the flashback at the beginning of Chapter 6, the orphanage is under attack. Kevin does not wait for Rufina. He goes in and he tries to take them all out. Now, the question is, why were the Jaegers invading the orphanage in the first place? And the reason why is because that orphanage was a cover to hide the existence of an artifact called the Spear of Loewe, which you might remember from Kevin's S-Craft. The Spear of Loewe apparently has the power that if you touch it, you turn into a demon. Given the fact that artifacts are quote-unquote gifts from the goddess, makes you wonder what kind of gift from the goddess this is, but be that as it may. A Jaeger had kidnapped Reese as a hostage, I suppose, brings her down to the chamber where this artifact is, and Kevin goes in after her. Kevin, the guy who's there to take the Spear of Loewe, turns into a demon, and that triggers Kevin's stigma, which is a necessary condition for him to become a Dominion. However, with all of that power coursing through his veins, he turns bloodthirsty, he destroys the Jaeger that had kidnapped Reese, and then can barely hold himself back from killing Reese herself. Rufina arrives at this point, fights Kevin away from Reese, and then lets Kevin kill her in order to save Kevin and Reese. Thus, Kevin actually killed Reese. Now, you might be wondering, why does Kevin have a stigma? Stigmas require trauma. Turns out his mom tried to kill him when he was a kid because she was really tired.
I was going to ask why you had skipped over Kevin talking about his early years, which comes before the revelation about Rufina.
Because that's how I wrote it, and that's how I remembered it, even though I was wrong, okay?
So, Kevin's early years. His dad was not in the picture. They're not divorced, which raises questions about the permissibility of divorce in Zemuria, wherever Kevin grew up.
I don't think the dad and the mother were ever married. It's stated that he has another family. It strikes me more that she was the kept mistress.
Okay, then he went out for cigarettes one day and then just...
Never came back.
So they have a really, I think, interesting portrayal of depression here. Because it's clear, I think the subtext, it's coded as his mom is severely depressed.
Yeah, like to a insane degree.
And just, like, it's hard being a single mother. It's hard on presumably limited money. I assume they're poor. And she was sick, got worse, and then he woke up to his mom trying to kill him, wanting them to die together.
Yeah.
Weird.
Because, I mean, she still loves him, but she wants out of this world. And I think one of the most effective pieces of artwork that we have seen so far is the picture of Kevin looking really happy, holding onto his mother's hand, in which we can't really see her face, but we can tell that she is just so depressed and done with life.
And then look at the next one. Look at the next picture a couple lines down on the Let's Play. You see her nose, you see her mouth, you don't see her eyes.
We never see her eyes the entire
from
time.
Kevin's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really well done. It looks so creepy.
Kevin blinked.
And so Kevin runs away.
Yeah, Kevin manages to escape, runs away, and then works up the courage to come back because, I mean, yes, his mother tried to kill him, but also that's his mother, which is, pretty important. He finds her bleeding on the floor, I believe. I'm trying to find that picture.
Bleeding on the floor. There's a knife, bloody knife. I don't want to speculate on the exact cause, but she died from blood loss.
It definitely looks like she stabbed herself. That's the only reason why she'd be holding on to... Why the knife would have fallen by her.
Didn't want to speculate on how exactly, what she did, and so forth. So, but there's something interesting that happens after. It's the stigma Kevin says was carved inside of me when he came upon the sea. It's not from birth.
No.
It's not because you're special, like you're marked for greatness. It's something awful has happened. It's a manifestation of trauma.
Or another way to put it, it's a manifestation of darkness.
Yes. And I think a lot of series would have a power that you can't control, would still have positive connotations, I think. You need to learn to refine the power, to use it for the betterment, but here it's not something at all to be celebrated.
Well, I mean, it is put to a good use by the Dominions. What's interesting to me, I don't really know why some people get stigmata and some people don't. Because, I mean, Loewe went through similar trauma, didn't get a stigma, as far as I'm aware. We were talking last time about how Shera has gone through a pretty dark period in a way that parallels Loewe. She doesn't have a stigma. Kevin does. And Kevin is able to use that stigma with training from the Gralsritter. Right? Well, it has to be activated. It's activated by this other traumatic event. By the fear that he feels for Reese's life. And then once that happens, he enters the Dominion. He becomes a Dominion, I should say.
So the S-Craft, then, in the game world, that's him using the stigma.
Yeah, because we unlock the Spear of Loa once he reveals his stigma to everybody else. But seen in this way, it's almost as if the Gralsritter, specifically the upper echelons of the Gralsritter, is a parallel organization to, say, the Enforcers of Ouroboros. Or maybe the Anguis. I'm not really sure what that would be and what the parallel is, but it seems that the Church of Eidos is using people's darknesses for quote-unquote good, whereas Ouroboros is using people's darkness for quote-unquote bad. And I'm putting them in quotes because even when we were looking at Luva, we can see how there's some good aspects to Ouroboros, at least in terms of appealing to people. Right now they're coded as pretty bad guys, but we've also heard tell of some Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that later. I'll scrub that part out of the episode. But they seem to be almost parallel organizations in a way.
Yes, they are very much foils of each other. And the church does some shady stuff too, and not just assassinations, but they put an orphanage over where they keep the artifact intentionally as cover.
It's not like this is a harmless artifact. This is an artifact that if a baby orphan found it by accident, which seems to not have happened, but kids can get into the craziest of places, and touched it, it would become a demon baby.
Look what Kevin says about the divine connection to that artifact.
I don't have the exact number in front of me. You're going to have to read it out.
It's in the Word document.
Well, I'm not looking at the Word document. I'm looking at the thing. Quote, a malignant spear that transforms the body of its wielder into that of a monster. It's hard to believe something like that could be a gift from the goddess, right? Which is the kind of the point that I had made introducing the concept. Me and Kevin, we think similarly.
Which one? That's for you to decide. But yeah, this is another moment, the second beat, in which we're kind of being asked to consider the question, this seems kind of sucky. Why would Eidos not only allow this, but have it be one of her creations?
Yeah, she is portrayed as an analog to the Christian God in that Eidos answers prayers, is all-powerful, yada yada. And in the same way as the Christian God, yet still evil exists, and sometimes it appears that God does evil, that Eidos is doing evil. That's I don't see how else you describe the creation of an artifact like this.
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. I'm sure Colin's going to say now, this pays off in Kuro 2 or whatever.
Well, unfortunately, it seems as if the patch for Kuro 2 may have been abandoned, which sucks, because I was enjoying it, and now I have to wait for it to be localized in like 50 fucking years. So hopefully it gets going again. But no, so far this does not lead to anything in Kuro that I'm aware of. Phantasma kind of leads to something later, but that's okay.
Colin just wants a bunch of volunteers working for free, translating a niche game, to continue working for free to translate a niche game so he can play the game quicker.
Look, two things. Number one, at least for the next couple of weeks, I'm still in academia, so that's the standard. It's revealed that the Lord of Phantasma is Rufina. Only kinda, as we talked about, this is Kevin's version of Rufina. And it appears that this entire realm is born out of Kevin's wish to be punished for killing Rufina. He had taken on some punishments himself by taking on all of these hard jobs, being the quote-unquote heretic hunter, but still Rufina's memory haunts him. He's so traumatized by it that when the Aureole is destroyed, Phantasma itself needed a place to go, because it was a subsystem, which meant that it still had existence independent of the Aureole, but it was an integral part of the Aureole. And so the Phantasma, for some reason, latched on to the most traumatized person in the area. And I guess with Weissman having been turned into salt, that was going to be Kevin. So it comes into Kevin, which then, when Kevin comes into contact with something that we saw in the prologue, still not quite sure what that, I think it was an artifact. The artifact that was pulled out of the ocean. That triggered this whole thing. But Kevin was a necessary part of that equation.
He never processed the trauma, never dealt with the guilt in a productive way. He left Reese. They hadn't seen each other from shortly after that day until they ran into each other when she was a squire. And Kevin doesn't really know Reese that well based on what he thought her reaction would be to learning about the news. And she is angry, but not for the reasons he thought would be.
I mean, Yeah, at this point, she's angry that Kevin had shouldered that burden on himself. I gotta be honest, if I was in Kevin's position, I would assume that the sister of the woman I had just killed would be mad at me. Yeah, I don't know if it's really all that natural for Reese to not care that Kevin did that.
Flip side, she's also had 5 years to come to terms with it.
That's true, but then that would mean that while it's weird, right? Because Reese is mad at Kevin for keeping it from her. But I also think that she would only get to that reaction because he kept it from her.
If she somehow learns the next day, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, conceivably, if she could understand the circumstances behind it, maybe, but that really seems like something that you'd have to be able to mourn Rufina first and, let that go before finding out the whole real circumstances behind her death.
She did move on. She did process this, and she's dealt with it and is dealing in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Kevin's stuck, and Rufina Reese has a really good comment. She realizes Kevin does not want to atone.
No.
Because that would mean absolving himself from the guilt about moving on. He wants to be stuck, about to always feel this way.
I mean, he wants to be punished for that. And punishment does not necessarily mean atonement. He doesn't believe that he can get rid of that guilt. But he does want to receive due recompense for that guilt.
Yeah, he thinks that he's involved, culpable for the death of the two of the most important people in his life.
Yeah. And we see that reflected in gameplay. So, quote-unquote, Rufina opens up a portal to Gehenna. Reese goes down first, and then Kevin jumps in after her. And basically, the entirety of Chapter 7, gameplay-wise, is really straightforward. It's Kevin and Rufina fighting through the gates of hell. And along the way, you fight people that Kevin has killed. So you fight the first heretic that he had killed, who seems to be a real bastard. You fight a kid who had been transformed into a demon and suffered from eternal hunger, and Kevin tried his best to save him, could not do it, and so had to kill him. He seems to be haunted by that memory as well. Then the third one that he has to kill his own mother again, which is kind of fucked up if you think about it. And then we fight Weissman at the end. I'm not really sure. I mean, gameplay-wise, it's a cool moment to fight Weissman again, and we get some interesting insights into Weissman's character there. But in terms of emotional impact, I felt like it would have been better for the mom to be a boss,
Indeed. I think it would have been a fitting final boss. But that's not what we get. We get Weissman, who wants Kevin to remove himself of his humanity, become like that ascended being that Weissman tried to turn into in the end of SC.
And he says, no thanks, I'm going to stay a human. And the reason why he fights so hard to get out is because he has Reese with him. He outright says that, if he was just by himself, maybe things would have gone differently. But because he's still responsible for Reese, he will continue to fight for his humanity.
Yeah. And so there's a comment on the Let's Play about the decision-making skills of the Oriole that I want to read out because I think it's pretty apt. Note to future generations, please calibrate your marvelous wish-granting engines to not prioritize the most fucked up wishes from the most fucked up people within range. It leads to unhealthy stuff.
I mean, it is true that the Oriole picked the most traumatized person around. Like, the Oriole could have picked on Zinn, Cassius, Estelle, Joshua, picked Kevin Graham. Seems to have been a bad idea.
If it was Olivier, this game would have been NC-17, but
Oh, totes. NC-17, it wouldn't have gotten a rating.
And
I would play that. I would play an Olivier modded version of Trails in the Sky the Third.
the stuff from Weissman, it feels kind of weird because it's so stuck in like the themes and conflict of SC about humanity and so like external stuff, whereas the third, and especially this moment, is so interior character focused. It just feels so weird, and that's, I think, maybe part of the reason why Kevin feels so comfortable just saying no, even though he's tempted, because it's Weissman is making a sales pitch for something out of date. I don't know. It just felt
And
weirdly.
again, I like Weissman being here
Yeah.
in terms of gameplay. Obviously the man's rotting in hell. He's somebody that Kevin killed personally, but also the whole point of this is that Kevin is tortured by past experiences. And so the people that we're fighting in Gehenna are people that he's tortured by. I don't believe for a second that Kevin Graham is tortured by the death of the Anguis George Weissman.
No.
If there's anybody that he shouldn't feel guilty about, it's the man who tried to take over the world.
And we know this because Kevin makes a quip either before or after killing Weissman. And he's in a psychological state where he can do this and sleep easy. Whereas, do you think for a moment he made a snarky comment after killing the child cursed with hunger? Yeah.
No, definitely not. At least not to the kid. I mean, maybe as a defense mechanism later, but
Yeah.
in that
Because
moment,
he was
absolutely
like,
not.
Nice to see you.
But
God.
speaking of quips, we're about to enter a real heated debate. Because after Weissman dies, we're met by our Lord and Savior, Gilbert Stein, who has somehow also fallen into Gehenna, and he's running, and behind him is a horde of demons.
It's
And I don't think that Kevin likes this very much.
so awful. It's such a bad choice. So, a bunch of demons surround devils, and it looks bad. Like, this is it. They fight Weissman. They don't have anything left in the tank. And then, like, Gilbert's all pathetic. I don't want to die here, not here. And then Gilbert's saying, like, eek. And doesn't know what the Lord of Phantasma is. It just removes narrative weight, the seriousness, the tension, the pathos for bad slapstick until the cavalry comes in.
I don't know if it really takes away
Yes, it
from
does.
the moment. I think that we have enough of the... I'm giving my opinion here, man. We come to the culmination of that moment, and I don't think that, like, when the cavalry comes in, there's enough relief there. Gilbert coming in, it's a moment of levity after, like, a lot of really heavy stuff. And I'm sure there's going to be more heavy stuff coming down the line. To have one moment in which you're like, hey, it's Gilbert, it lightens the tension a little bit. Not completely. I mean, he's still being chased by a bunch of demons. But it's like in a horror movie. And I don't watch a lot of horror, but, a good horror movie is not always scary all of the time. It's scary, punctuated by moments of levity and humor. And that's what Gilbert is providing.
You want tonal whiplash, and Gilbert does not provide a very unsubtle form of humor. But the humor has to meet the moment and fit. And I just don't think it does here.
Well, we can agree to disagree. I personally will continue to worship at the altar of our Lord and Savior, Gilbert Stein.
There's another thing I don't like.
What?
So I like the cavalry coming in and all the other party members fighting to allow Kevin and Elise the chance to disengage and retreat back through the doors of Gehenna. I don't like how literally everyone has multiple comments and quips and the like. It just kind of drags.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, like, if this was done in a cutscene, like, I'm talking animated, voiced cutscene,
Yeah.
then it would have, like, the Marvel's Avengers type stuff, right? But this is a problem that we see in later Trails games that have huge parties, too. Everybody's got to say something. And everybody has their own text box, and you just have to keep going through them because they're all basically saying the same thing. And it can get tiring after a while. I don't think it really takes away from the moment here, but I do acknowledge the validity of this concern.
Yeah. Okay. And I get that. But there is one thing I want to bring up that's sort of tangential. It's about who is behind all this. And Kevin's exact quote. I've got a pretty good idea who's
Okay.
responsible for all of this. I can only think of
Okay.
one person twisted enough to put us through all we've been through. The short version is their real piece of work, a cunning, arrogant, cold-hearted son of a bitch who doesn't even see people as people. He was not talking about Rufina.
Oh. You know, he was not talking about the Lord of Phantasma either.
Yeah.
He was talking about himself. And then now, going back, I think that's really the way that is phrased. He's not talking about the Lord of Phantasma. He's talking about the root creation of Phantasma, which is himself. Well, do you have
Yeah.
anything else about this chapter to talk about before we wrap up? Because we want to talk about plans for the podcast in the next couple of weeks. And today. Well, today as in the day that this is uploaded.
We got a really good discussion on some absolutely pivotal moments for Kevin Graham for the third game of the Kaseki series that puts an end on the liberal arc. We're almost to the end of the game. We're almost going to start a new chapter in the series. And this is really when things are
Yes.
coming to a head for a pretty substantial portion of the games. It's all the people that we've seen so far in liberal.
Yes. And gameplay-wise, we are almost to the end. However, temporally-wise, no, we're not. Because while we've talked about some doors, we've talked about a lot of the game itself, but there are still a lot of doors that we need to get through. And in the last week, I mean, we talked about, 3 or 4 doors? It took an hour. And we have more than that to do. So it's going to be like another 2 or 3 episodes about doors before we can really finish this game up. So that's going to be our plans for the next couple of episodes. However, I want to announce one thing. Kevin already talked about it in the beginning of the podcast, but on today, May 14th, the day that this episode goes live, Kevin will be up here with me in my apartment, in my small-ass studio apartment, visiting me. And we will be having a live stream in which we will live stream Star Door 15. Kevin will give his reaction. Kevin does not know what Star Door 15 is. He has somehow remained completely unspoiled about it. He has some predictions. We'll talk about those predictions before we do it. But then he's going in blind, and you all can watch it happen on Twitch. I don't know precisely what time today it will be, because we're recording this a week before. Kevin's not here yet. But check Twitter, @TrailsInThePod. We will post the timing information for that.
And by
We
the
hope to
time that
see
you
there.
listen to this episode, we will have tweeted a couple of times about the live stream to come.
Yes,
So this
for sure.
hopefully should not be new news to all of you. I used to think it was Ren, but we got Ren's door. It was that one where we got Patomato, the new S-Craft, which I think also looks totally broken.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
it's in the next plane. We don't have the door yet, so the first clue will be, what does the door clue? And that should give the tone. I'm looking forward. Sunday evening, May 14th. Will I sleep on Colin's hopefully comfortable couch?
I think for you it'll be comfortable enough. You're a bit smaller than me, but I got sheets ready for you. I got a nice blanket. My cat will snuggle with you. It'll be great.
Until next time, a few hours from now, I'm Kevin. That's Colin.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.